Okay, what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to share my testimony. I think sometimes we talk about many great things and many theoretical things, but sometimes some of the best stories are the stories of what God has done for each one of us. So this evening I'm going to share my experience, and I hope I don't want to be boring, and I don't want to be tedious, and I'll try not to be, but I shouldn't be a preacher. I should not be standing here proclaiming the word of God. My life is a statement to me of the amazing grace of God, and I can't stop thinking about it and talking about it. This year, when we leave here, this is our first trip for the year. When we leave here, we're going to be in Texas, and we're going to be in Orlando. Then later in the year, we're going to be in Tennessee and Washington. And we're also going to be preaching we're also going to be spending a week having meetings in a Mennonite church. Later in the year, we're going to be during the summer, we're going to be in Romania, Hungary, Serbia, Germany, and then later in the year, we're going to be in Tennessee again, and possibly we're going to be in Canada. So we're going to be, I'm mentioning it to you because I want to just highlight the fact that God has given us the privilege. He has given me the privilege. I'm focusing on my testimony. God has given me the privilege of preaching His word in different parts of the world. When I am the least worthy person, I would even say I am the least, I won't say I'm the least qualified. I was the least qualified. I'm not the least qualified anymore because God has qualified me for the job. He doesn't put you somewhere where He doesn't prepare you for it. So I think I'm qualified for the job today by God's grace. But I know that I did not start out that way. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from and what the Lord has done for me and how the Lord has worked, because I think that it will be an encouragement to the rest of us to hear again some of the things that God has done for in this time and in this age. Okay, I grew up in a Christian home, in a Seventh-day Adventist home. Like I said, when I was born, my father was a Seventh-day Adventist minister. When I was 10 years old, he left the ministry for reasons I never understood until when I was a grown man. My eldest brother told me what had happened, but I never knew as a boy growing up. I only knew that all of a sudden my father was home all the time when he used to be out. And I thought it was great fun as a little boy because we'd be out in the night playing games and running around, but we happened to be a family at that time without anybody to provide for us because my father was the provider and he didn't have a job. And my father only knew how to be a minister. He was a very good preacher, but he was not very practical or good with his hands. So after he lost the job, he could hardly get another job. He was in and out from one job to another, and our lives became financially very hard. My parents didn't believe it was the days when they didn't believe in birth control. Let the Lord plan. So they ended up with 10 children, of which I'm the third. So we kind of didn't pay much attention to religion after my father left the ministry. We still had family worship. Mama still wanted us to go to church, but Daddy didn't want to go to church. He was bitter against the church for a while. And so he didn't go to church much. And so we didn't end up going there much. But, eventually we started going more often. But when I was 13 years old, I was baptized because my eldest brother was getting baptized. And I thought, if I want to go to heaven, I have to be baptized. So I was baptized. But as I've often said, I went in there a dry sinner and I came out a wet sinner because nothing changed. It's like I went from bad to worse after that. But God had his hand on my life. I remember my father said something that he had 10 children. But this stuck in my mind. It seems like I'm the only one who remembers it. But he said it a few times, and I don't know how he ever got this message. But he said, God told him, he said, God told me I will not be a shadow of my seed. And what he means is that God showed him that whatever he was, his seed will be greater, far greater. He'll be just a shadow of what his seed becomes. And I didn't know what that meant. I don't know how he got this message from God. He said it a few times. But the thing is, my father was an outstanding preacher. In fact, some people said when he was doing his course in the university, in the Adventist college, they referred to him as Pope. They called him the Pope because he was a very eloquent person. I mean, I can't speak like my father. When he was a little boy, he came from humble beginnings, but he liked to speak. And he used to listen to the BBC and practice to speak like that. And so he was gifted in speaking. In Jamaica, the ordinary people speak a kind of broken English that we call patois. My father didn't speak patois. My father was always polished English. If he spoke patois, it was because he was trying to tease somebody, but he was always, we weren't like that. So, when Daddy used to say, the Lord showed him that he will not be a shadow of his seed. None of us really took it seriously, but it stuck in my mind. When I was 16 years old, for the first time in my life, God spoke to me. I had a dream. And it's only 2 times in my life I ever got a dream that I think God gave me. That was one. That was the first one. It was vivid. It was graphic. It was like real. When I woke up, I was perspiring. At this time, I used to attend high school, 26 miles away from home. I used to take the bus, those big old country buses we have in Jamaica. I used to take the bus sometimes when we could afford it. Other times I would try to bum a ride. But in my dream, I was on this bus. And it was full of people. People coming from the market, and in Jamaica, when they get on the bus, they chat and they make noise and they laugh, and it's a very noisy thing. So everybody was laughing and chatting, and I was sitting on the bus, and in my dream, I dozed. But, I was in that half doze where you're aware of what is happening. And then everything was quiet, and so I opened my eyes because the bus didn't stop, but everything was quiet all of a sudden. And when I looked, there was nobody on the bus except me. And I don't know how everybody got off the bus, but here I was alone. And then the bus started to pick up speed, and it started to go very fast until it was rocking from side to side. And in my dream, it was now night, and I could look through the window, and I saw the trees flashing by outside as the light from the bus flashed on the trees. And then I looked at the driver's seat, and my blood went cold because there was no driver. The steering wheel was only turning by itself, and I was on this bus rocketing down the road alone. And then something said to me, look behind. And I was kind of afraid to turn around. But then I turned around and I looked down the long passage. And on the last seat at the back, there was a long seat. That long seat at the back, I saw a man sitting. And he had on a shiny black raincoat. But his head was down like this. And he had on a shiny black rain hat. And I couldn't see his face. And as I was looking, I saw him begin to raise his head like this. And the first thing I saw was his teeth. He was grinning. And as he raised his head more, I saw his eyes red like fire, and I realized it was the devil. And here I am on this bus alone with the devil, traveling at 90 miles per hour through the darkness. And as I watched, he got up out of his seat and he started to walk down the passage towards me. And I was sitting in my seat. I can't move, I can't run, I don't know what to do. And he came and he stood, he just came up to me like with his teeth grinning, and he just did like this. I have you now! And in my dream, even though I wasn't much of a Christian, I cried out, Jesus, help me! They sprung out of my mouth, Jesus, help me! And in an instant, there was a flash of light. And the bus disappeared, and the devil disappeared. And I found myself standing at a crossroad. One road led to Falmouth, where I lived. The other road led to Montego Bay, where I was coming from. And the other road led to a place named Chatham. And I'm standing here, and I know it was not night anymore. It was like twilight, getting dark. I'm standing here, and I don't know what to do. And then I saw a girl coming from the side road. And she said, it was a girl I knew from my hometown. And she said, "You going home?" I said, "Yes." She says, "Walk with me." So I started walking with her, but as we were traveling together, I started to feel uneasy, and so I started to drop back a little bit. And I noticed she was kind of looking like smoke, like she was getting, I could almost see through her. We were on the main road, which was broad, but it was going like this. It was winding. And as I watched, she seemed to be getting more and more foggy. And then at that time, I had a teacher from my high school. He had a very deep voice. And I heard his voice coming from the sky, and it said, "Clayton, do you want to get home safely?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Don't follow the girl any further. Stop where you are. And I will send 2 messengers to take you home." So I stopped where I was, and I saw 2 little boys come out of the road, the bushes at the side of the road. In that area, both sides of the road are lined with mangrove swamps. But they came through a little path through the swamp, and one took this hand, one took this hand, and they led me to a little path in the bushes. And then I saw the sunlight coming down through the trees, and they led me, and I was on the way home. And then I woke up out of my sleep. And when I woke up, I was perspiring. And I don't think I need to interpret this dream, because it was graphic, and for me, the longer I have lived, the more clear the meaning is, the more I can see what God was trying to say to me. But it gave me an awareness that God wanted to protect me. God wanted to save me and do something with my life. When I was 17 years old, I left high school. I graduated, and I didn't know what to do with my life. There was a gentleman who was the principal of a primary school, and he was a friend of my father. And in Jamaica, at that time, they had a program where you could work as what is called a pre-trained teacher. You could work as a teacher, and you get a lower salary, but even though you were not trained, you could work because they were short of teachers. So I got a job as a pre-trained teacher. I wasn't qualified. I was just, 17 plus. I didn't know what I was doing. But the man wanted a teacher, so he asked me to come. So I started teaching, and now I was getting my own money. Sometimes my father wasn't working, and my parents lost control of me. They couldn't tell me what to do anymore because I was making my own money. So at that time we were living in a little seaside village where the people, as I said, were very loose. They were from a different world. And I just dropped into that world, and I started to get involved with everything that was going on. I mean, I can't tell you so. I got into every immorality. Plus, I started playing poker. I would go up to a little place every night and play poker. I would smoke marijuana, anything. I got into the life of the community. And, I mean, my father would try to talk to me, my mother. But I had a method to get my father off my back. I would say to my father, "Daddy, does God know if I will be saved?" My father would say, "Yes, he knows." I said, "Well, if God knows I'm going to be saved, I can't be lost. And if God knows I'm going to be lost, I can't be saved." And I thought, I got him. So I would always give him that answer. Today I see how stupid I was, but at that time I appeared to be very smart. Now, one day, I looked at the bookshelf and I found a book. It was entitled Chariots of the Gods. I don't know what that was doing in my father's bookshelf, but it's a book that says there's no God. But long ago, people from outer space, they came to visit Earth. And when those primitive people saw these spaceships, they thought they were chariots from the gods. And so they, like they say, Elijah went up in a chariot of fire. It was really a spaceship. And I wanted to believe it. And the book tried to show you little things like Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel. It was a spaceship and so forth. So I wanted to believe it. And so I started to believe it, and I started to tell myself and to tell people that I don't believe in God. That, God was a spaceman. And for 5 years, that kind of silenced my conscience, because I knew if there was a God, I was heading for hell. So it kind of silenced my conscience for 5 years until I was 22. I did everything. On Sabbaths I would go, I'm playing cricket, or I'm playing football, I'm doing something. I have nothing to do with religion anymore. I'm going to parties at night, I'm carousing, and I don't care. And I don't know where I'm going. I have no idea. I'm still working as a preacher and teacher, but I have no plan for my life. And then at 22 years old, at 22 years of age, something happened to me. A disaster came into my life that I could not tell anybody. I couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't share it with my parents, my brothers, nobody. I thought of killing myself. But I guess I'm not that, I don't have that kind of heart. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go, where to turn. And for 3 days, I was in torment. And at the end of 3 days, a strange thought came to my mind. The thought was, you never ever gave God a chance. And it's strange because for 5 years I'm saying there is no God. And now I'm in this problem, and my mind turns to God, and I realize that I was lying to myself. I believe in God. I was just lying to myself. And the thought came, you never gave God a chance. And then I'm thinking to myself, I don't like religion. I don't like what I see in the churches. For me, the church was like, you go to church and you're bored to death. You sit down and you listen to somebody pound the desk, and you have to sit straight, and you have to not, if you go outside, the older people tell you to come inside. My memories were not so good. And I'm thinking, do I want this? And then my mind said, but that's not what it was like in the Bible, because I'm familiar with the Bible to some extent. And I'm saying that's not what I saw in the Bible. And in the Bible, I see Abraham talking to God. I see Elijah talking to God. And I thought, why doesn't that happen anymore? My mind is new and fresh. I'm thinking of religion in a fresh way. And I'm saying, why doesn't that happen anymore? And I remember one memory verse I had learned, which says, I am God, and I change not. And I said, if God don't change, if God doesn't change, why don't we see people having this kind of relationship with God anymore? And the thought came, it must be people who changed. If God never changed, then it must be people who changed. And I'm thinking like this, and I'm beginning to get excited, because I'm thinking, I wonder if it's possible, if God doesn't change, I wonder if it's possible for me to have that kind of relationship with God, like what I see in the Bible. And I'm kind of getting excited, because I'm thinking, maybe it's possible. Because you see, religion doesn't appeal to me, but the idea of having a relationship with God himself is what is being introduced to my mind, and it's kind of exciting me. My life, you have to understand, I'm 22 years old, and I don't know where I'm going. I don't know where I'm going. I have no goal in life, no plan. I don't know what I want to be. I just drifted into this job, and now I'm in this disaster, and I don't know what I'm living for. And I look back over my life, and I see that my life is just without any purpose, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I feel like I need somebody to take charge of my life who knows what he's doing. And so my thoughts turned to God. And the thought came, as I'm thinking like this, the thought came, you can't turn to God now. 5 years you spat in God's face. How can you turn to God now? And then I thought, well, you know what? I'm not going to ask God to solve my problem. I'm just going to ask him to take my life and make something useful with it. Because I don't know what I'm doing. And by this time now, I already had a child out of wedlock. When I was 19 years old, I became a father of a little girl. And by this time, so my life is just drifting. And so I decided I'm going to ask God to take my life. I'm not going to ask him to solve my problem. I just want somebody to take me and do something good with me. That's all I want. I remembered 2 verses, and these 2 verses, they stick in my mind as my conversion verses. Number 1, All things work together for good to them that love God. You can tell why that meant a lot to me. And the second one was, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. So, I decided I was going to give my life to God. I was going to ask him to become my friend. I made up my mind I was going to be the best friend that God has on this earth. That was my ambition. I didn't want to be a Christian. I didn't want to be a church member. The way it came to me, I want to be the best friend that God has on this earth. I came to religion on the basis of friendship. I came to religion on the basis of needing a friend and viewing God that way. And I'm glad that in 43 years, that perspective didn't change. Doctrine didn't bring me to God, neither did church nor religion. It was a friend that I needed. I tell you, 3 days later I prayed. It was the 5th of May, 1975. It was about between 10 and 12. I can tell you the time. It was so vivid in my mind. I know when I was born again. I know the day, I know the date, I know the time of day. Between 10 and 12 in the morning, 5th of May 1975. I asked God to take me. I asked him to make me his friend. I don't know if I knelt down. It was at the side of my bed, but I don't know if I knelt down or I sat on the bed. But look here. When I started to pray, the world was on my head. When I finished praying, goodness me, I was light as a feather. I was light as a feather. I didn't care about anything anymore. I looked out the window. I had never seen the grass so green in my life. I looked at the sky. It was the bluest sky I ever saw in my life. Those two things I saw clearly. I looked out the window, the greenest grass, the bluest sky. From that moment, my life changed. That Sabbath I got up and I put on my clothes to go to church. My mother nearly dropped down because for 5 years she's trying to get me into church and she can't get me to go. And this Sabbath I just get up and I'm ready and I'm gone. And since that time I hardly have, I can't think of any Sabbath that I ever stayed home and didn't worship. After I left the church, and it was with the group, but I remember the sermon. God sent a little red man with a little red mustache and red beard to preach that Sabbath. I remember his sermon. Godliness with contentment is great gain. Things like that stick in your brain. So, I became a Christian. And then I wanted to become a pastor, of course. First thing I wanted to do is to preach the message. So there was the Adventist college where they train ministers. And I know in Jamaica, they're not likely to accept you if they know you have a child outside of marriage. But I wrote a letter 4 pages long, explaining that I was converted. I had been out in the world, this happened to me, and I would like to be a minister, and I'd like them to accept me for the ministerial program. I went to the school, and I didn't get to see the president, but his secretary, I gave her the letter, and I said, please hand this to the president for me. She promised she would. I went home. That's the last I ever heard of it. I never heard anything more. No response, no reply. So I made up my mind that I'll never be a minister. God doesn't want me to be a minister. I tried to get into one of these American schools. I applied to Oakwood, Andrews, Loma Linda. I got every address and I applied. Most of them sent me back a package and they said, well, they could accept me, but I needed like $7,000 or $12,000 US in order to start the program. Me, I didn't even have 1,000 Jamaican dollars. So, I made up my mind I'll never be a minister. But I was teaching. And then what happened was that I started giving Bible studies to the students every day. Every chance I'm giving them Bible studies. And my conscience started to bother me because I'm thinking, man, I'm not being paid for this. I'm robbing the government because they are paying me to teach whatever it was I was teaching. And every day I'm having Bible studies. I can't help myself. Every chance I'm talking to them about the Bible and about God. And it's growing in my mind. So eventually I thought, I'm going to go to teacher's college. So I left the job. I went to teacher's college. When I came back, I went back into the job. The same thing is happening. All I'm doing is teaching the Bible. And So I decided that I'm going to have to leave the job. I actually left my job twice. The first time I left on good terms. I left to go out and work for the Lord, and I didn't know what I was doing. Okay? I left and I didn't know where to work, how to work. For about 6 months, I would try to find people and give Bible studies, but after 6 months, I felt like this is going nowhere. And I went back to the job. They took me back because they appreciated my services. I stayed there for another 2 years. After 2 years, the same thing is happening, and the burden is on my mind that I need to leave. And so I decided this time I'm going to ask God to direct me, to give me clear evidence of what He wants me to do. So I started praying. And during that time, I tell you, I had some remarkable experiences. Like, for example, I wrote a little tract about the mark of the beast, as I understood it at that time. And so sometimes some of the brethren that I was fellowshipping with, they would give me a little money and say to help with the printing of tracts. So I said to God, Father, if I'm going to leave my job, you will have to take care of me. Nobody has ever given me any money. But if you want me to leave my job, I want you to let somebody give me some money for my personal use. And if this happens, I will take it as a sign that you want me to leave. That Sabbath I went to worship. A sister came to me with a little brown envelope, and written on it was, this is for your personal use. First in my life, and it was 100 Jamaican dollars. Not a great deal of money, but I mean, it was said for my personal use. For the first time, the one day that I asked God, there it was. So that was one of the things that God made me know. He wanted me to leave. Another day, I'm still praying because it's a year. I'm praying for a year. I decided to wait 1 year before I made that decision. So that whole year I was praying. Another day, I'll tell you something. I asked the Lord to give me a message from the Bible. All right? Another word that I should leave the job. So I took my Bible and I prayed, and I flipped my Bible open. And I put my finger and then I opened my eyes. My finger was on this verse. It's somewhere in Chronicles. I could find it. It says, and Jehoshaphat ruled over Israel. He was 35 years when he began to reign. 2 days before was my 35th birthday. 2 days before that was my 35th birthday. And that hit me so hard. I grabbed my Bible and I looked for 35. That number 35 appears in the Bible only 2 times. And one of those places was where I put my finger. 2 days after my 35th birthday, the Lord said to me, Jehoshaphat ruled over Israel. He was 35 years old when he began to rule. So I mean, things like that happened. And I came to understand that He wanted me to do this. So I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have a job in any ministry. I'm just a person with a burden on my heart, and I can't stop talking about God, and I'm robbing the government. I'm having Bible studies with the students every chance I get. Sometimes we don't even have a class. I'm talking about the Bible, and I say, I can't continue like this. I can't stop talking about this, so I have to leave the job. So after 1 year, I resigned. They wanted me to stay. The principal said, we will allow you to work half day. Come in half day. And that was very tempting, because that is unheard of. I come in half day and I get my salary and I get the other half for myself. That is unheard of. And I took it as a temptation from Satan, and I told him, no, I'm leaving. And I left. Now, look here. After I left the job, I had a bike at the time. And I said to myself, I don't have a job. I don't have an income. I have a wife and 3 children. I'm paying rent. I don't have a home. I don't know how I'm going to live, but I know I can't buy gas. So I sold the bike and I bought a bicycle. And I'm preparing for hard times. And everybody said I was crazy. And sometimes I felt like I was crazy too. But, I mean, because of praying for 1 year and hearing and seeing all these things, if I even died, if we even starved, I couldn't change my mind. Because I had clear direction from God that this is what He wanted me to do. So I resigned the job, I gave up the job, and then for 6 months, I passed through the hardest time I ever passed through in my life. for 6 months. And I'll tell you something. In those 6 months, I saw miracles. Okay? I never went hungry. My family never missed a meal. But I'll tell you this. I remember an old brother used to say, God never said, your bread and your butter shall be sure. He said, your bread and your water. And that's what it came down to many times, bread and water. I'll tell you, you know, on Sabbath in Jamaica, it's a tradition. Adventists, they eat the best meal on Sabbath. All right? I don't know if it's the same thing here, but it's the best meal on Sabbath. One Sabbath, we were going to worship, and there was no food in the house. I don't know. We probably had a little cornmeal, and we made something with it with a little oil, and we had that for breakfast. Me, my wife, and my 3 children. And we went to church, and I said to my wife, somebody will invite us home for lunch. So we went to church. Church was over. Everybody shook hands. Nobody invited us for lunch. So we went back home. When we got home, my wife says, what are we going to do? We're changing off. I says, all we can do is pray, because I know there's no food. She knows there's no food, not even a biscuit, but the children don't know. And it's hard on a Sabbath to say to children there's nothing to eat. Now, let me tell you something. I could have gotten money. My brothers would have given me. My father my old father, when he was working, he would give me. They would never refuse me. But I made a commitment to God that, look here, nobody will ever know that I'm in need. Because nobody will say, God took me out of my job to make me starve. Nobody will say, God took me out of my job to make me depend on other people. So I made up my mind before I left that I will never ever say to anybody that I'm in need. So I could not ask anybody for anything. The only person I could ask was God. And so, I mean, I even if my wife gets old and miserable, I have to always stick with her, because she never complained. I value her for that. She never complained. She believed in my relationship with God. She believed in what I was trying to do, and she would only look at me sometimes with those reproachful eyes and and then I'd feel so bad. And sometimes I would think, it's your fault. You left your job, but I couldn't do anything but go to God. And this Sabbath, I'm there. I said, let's pray. So we are praying. And look here. In the middle of the prayer, somebody calls at the gate. I read this thing in storybooks, but I mean, I've experienced it. While we are praying, somebody is calling at the gate. So we finished the prayer and we went to the gate, and there was a brother. I've known this guy since 1976. And this was like maybe about 12 or so years later, maybe 15 years later. And he's kind of apologetic. He says, David, I'm sorry I'm just coming, man, but, you know, today is my anniversary. And my wife and I, we have prepared an anniversary meal, and we want you and your family to come and share it. So the meal was already prepared, already cooked, already waiting for us. And it was not just a meal, it was an anniversary dinner. So, you know, they have prepared everything fancy for this meal. And it is there waiting for us. The one Sabbath when he didn't have any meal. So that was one of the miracles that took place. Let me share another couple with you. Another day, we had nothing. My little girl went to school. She was the oldest one. The 2 little boys are at home. My little girl is gone to school. And I'm concerned because there's nothing for her when she comes home. There's nothing for lunch. And that was on my mind more than anything else. A little girl goes to school. She comes back home. She was about maybe 9 or 10. She comes home. And there's nothing to eat. That was on my mind. So I decided to go and see if there was anything in the post office. I don't know where to go. So I jumped on my bicycle. I rode out to the town. I went to the post office. Nothing. So I'm discouraged. My sister-in-law had a shop in the park. So I went and sat in the shop for a little bit. She had a shop where she sells little trinkets. So I sat in the shop, and she's trying to talk to me, but I'm so distracted. My mind is so discouraged. I'm not even answering. And she's talking, and after a while the thought came to me, go in the park and pray. So I left my bicycle there and I went in the park and I started to pray. And I'm so discouraged and I'm so downcast and I'm complaining to God. And I look up in the tree and I see two black birds. And the birds are fat and they are shining. And it comes to my mind, consider the birds of the air. They do not plant and they do not sow, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Do not be afraid, you are of more value than many sparrows. As I looked, I saw one of the birds fly down and pick up something from the grass, and there was something to it, and he went off. And then the other one flew down and picked up something else, and he was gone. And I thought to myself, my goodness, look how God provided for these two birds just like that. And here I am worrying about my family. And I got a surge of faith, and I thought, I'm going home. My family cannot go hungry. So I'm full of happiness all of a sudden. And nothing has changed. All I've done, I've seen two birds. So I went into the shop and I said to my sister-in-law, okay, Jill, take care. I'm going home. So I jumped on my bicycle and I started to ride off. And she says, oh, David, stop. Hold on. Somebody just left this for you. Right? Somebody left $8. Listen, $8 is nothing in Jamaica now, but in those days, I went home with bread and butter and flour and sugar and cooking oil and a few things. And on the way home, I met my little girl coming from school. So that when she got home, there was something there for her to eat. Now, I'm telling you, it wasn't bread and butter, but it was enough every day, just a little every day. I remember one night my father gave me $10, my old father. And when he gave me that $10, it burned like fire. Because I knew I should be giving my father something, and he gives me $10, and he didn't know, but that $10 saved us from going hungry that night. And it hurt me when I had to take that $10. But it got me prepared for something. It prepared me for the thinking that you don't provide for yourself. God provides for you how he wants. And when he provides, you accept it and you don't complain. So, I've had so many of these experiences that, well, they were not all from this time. For example, when I used to work at a training center for teenagers. And one day, for some reason, I used to travel back and forth with another teacher. So sometimes I was not careful enough with my budget. And one day, I had to go to work, and I didn't have the fare to go to work because I used to travel with the bus in the morning and come up with the teacher in the evening. Now in Jamaica, the system is a little funny because the buses on this particular route, they travel from Mandeville to Kingston. From Mandeville to Kingston, it costs $10. I wanted to travel from Mandeville to Porus. It's a short journey. It costs $2 for that journey. Now, the buses traveling to Kingston, they don't want to carry you because you take up a seat where they could get a $10 passenger. So, what we do, we stand on the corner. When the bus is coming, you stop the bus. They say, where are you going? You don't answer. You jump in the bus and you take a seat. So, they drive off. And when you get to Porus, you say, one stop, please stop. And then they grumble, but they take you $2 and you. Because if you say, I'm going to Porus, they won't take you on. So you don't answer. So that's how we normally get along. So this morning, I searched through the house, and all I can find is $1.90. It's not like here. If you go on the bus, the passengers are, the conductors are the most rowdy, outrageous, ill-mannered people you can imagine. Okay? They think nothing of embarrassing you on the top of their voice. If I go on this bus and I take this bus on a $2 trip journey when it should be $10, and then I give him $1.90, I know he's going to embarrass me on the bus this morning. And it's resting on my mind. I search every corner of the house, $1.90. So I go and I'm standing on the corner waiting for the bus and I'm feeling uneasy. And then the thought came, why don't you ask God for the 10 cents? I said, oh, it's 10 cents. I mean, why should I bother God about that? But then the thought came, he's your father. And he cares about what you care about. So I said, okay, I will pray. So I closed my eyes and I prayed and I asked God for 10 cents. And I opened my eyes. And I saw a pencil roll across the road. I saw a pencil rolling across the road. And when I saw the pencil roll, I looked up to see who dropped their pencil. And there was nobody. There was nobody there. The pencil just rolled across the road and came and stopped at my feet. It rested on 10 cents. The pencil stopped on 10 cents. If it was 20 cents or 50 cents or 5 cents, it would not mean anything. It stopped on 10 cents. And then there's a question, where did the pencil come from? I mean, to me, I call it the 10-cent miracle. Okay? There was an old man who used to live near us. His name was Mr. Manton, but they call him Watermouth because he was always dribbling. And he said he believes that God and Satan had a fight, and Satan won the fight because God is not answering prayers anymore. I said, Mr. Manton, how do you know that? He said, because he asked God for $1 million and all he got was 10 cents. And I tell you, I thought about it that day when I got that 10 cents, and I thought, would $1 million have meant as much as this 10 cents? No. That 10 cents was God speaking to me, God stepping down and saying, David, I care about your 10 cents. It meant a lot to me. And from time to time, he has intervened in my life like this. Another time, while I was still working, while I was still teaching, I used to play soccer. I mean, it was something I had a struggle giving up soccer. I love soccer. And it took a while before I was able to give it up. But while I was playing this day, the goalkeeper came for the ball and I went to hit the ball. And when he went to punch the ball, I hope, but his thumb went into my eye. When it went into my eye, it felt like it burst. It felt like the eyeball burst. The pain. When I went down, I had my hand like this, and I was afraid to move it because I expected to see only blood. When I moved my hand, I didn't see any blood, but I could not see out of the eye. There was a nurse working at the center, and she bandaged it up, and it was like that for a few days. But every day it got worse. I couldn't remove the bandage. I could not see. Any kind of light would give me terrible, terrible pain. So I had to keep it bandaged. 1 week passed, nothing. 2 weeks passed, it keeps getting worse and worse. Friday night, I can't sleep. I'm groaning all night. And my wife says, you have to go to the doctor tomorrow. And I'm kind of agreeing because it's been 2 weeks and the pain is growing worse. It's not improving. And I can't sleep. So 4 o'clock in the morning, I have not slept yet. And my wife finally says, she says, you want me to pray for you? And I don't know why somehow that never came up before. And I said, yes. And if you're going to pray for me, do what the Bible says. Get the olive oil and anoint me. So she got the olive oil and she prayed for me and she touched me. And when she touched me, I felt like a little electric shock ran through my eye. Like I got a little electric shock. And that's all I know. I just knocked out. Like within 30 seconds after I was touched, I couldn't sleep all night and suddenly I'm fast asleep. 30 seconds. Next thing I know, it's morning, it's 6 o'clock. 2 hours later, I wake up. This is from 4 to 6, I wake up and my eye is perfect. I can see everything as clear as ever. There's no pain. The only thing was that it was still red. It remained red for about 2 days afterwards before it cleared up. And so over and over again, God showed me that, I mean, I would be a terrible person if I should begin to doubt God, or I should begin to question God. Now, you might ask, how did I survive after I left my job? Because I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know, and I had no plan and no idea. All I knew that I was walking everywhere with my Bible under my arm and trying to find people to talk to. I had no plan. One day, and I had no income. One day, I received $100 in the mail from a lady in Florida. The lady said, I received a tract that you wrote about the mark of the beast. and I want to send this to you, $100. In Jamaica, $100 can go a little distance. The value right now is what, about $12,000 Jamaican dollars? Yeah, $100 is about 12,000 Jamaican dollars. That lady sent me $100 every day of her life for several years until she died. And that $100 every month, every month. That $100 became the basis of how my family managed to survive, or my family managed to live. Because we were paying rent. I never lived in a place that I could call my own until I was 40. Because my parents, my father didn't care about things like that. We lived in rented homes, and man, I went through some embarrassment. But I had the same kind of mindset. Okay, I'm going to be a pilgrim till Jesus comes. I'll never have a place of my own. That was my mindset. And I'll tell you what happened in a moment. But anyway, it's 5 o'clock. So little by little, people began to believe in what I was doing. I never, to this day, I'll tell you something that I'm proud of, and I'm not proud in a bad way, but I'm proud of this, and Brother Howard stands with me on this, and I'll tell you, I have never, ever asked anybody for 1 cent. From the day I left my job until we got into the ministry until today, never told anybody we have a need, never told anybody we have a ministry, never told anybody we need 1 cent. Every single bit of support and contribution was God saying to somebody, send something to support there. We have never done it, and we never will. And I'm happy for that. I'm thankful for that. And I tell you, God has done some amazing things. Amazing things. Little by little, people began to believe in the ministry, to see what we were doing, and they just began to support it. Right now, there are people in different parts of the world who say to me, Brother David, if you have any need at all, whatever it is, just let me know. There are people who I know will happily contribute $5,000, $10,000. Some of them are able to do it. They will never hear from me. Never. Because nobody will ever say that God starts a work that he cannot support. That God starts a work and you have to turn around and ask people. No, I don't believe God works that way. I believe in George Muller's principle. God's work done in God's way will never lack God's supplies. When you have to give God a helping hand, then I don't think you can be so certain that you are doing God's work. But you know, I don't want to be too long. I'll take 10 more minutes. But I rode a bike for 25 years. Couldn't afford a car. And I got so comfortable with that bike, I planned to die with the bike. I mean, it wasn't the same bike. I've owned about 15, 16 bikes. But started with a little tiny bike, and then but then I rode all over Jamaica, visiting different groups and sharing the message with different groups. Sometimes I'm coming home in the night, 11 o'clock at night. When I get home, I mean, it wouldn't be cold to you folks, but I get home pretty frozen sometimes. I can't even touch my wife. She doesn't want me to touch her when I get into bed. Sometimes I'm soaking wet. One day, a sister said to me, it's time you stop doing this. I'm going to buy a car and give it to you. And that's how I got my first car. She bought a car. It was in her name, and she gave me to use. I drove it for 2 years, and she says, look, we need to change this car. She was a doctor. She changed the car. I drove that for another 2 years, and then she says, you know what? I want to sign this car over to you. So she signed it over in my name, and so finally I had a car. And the amazing thing is, she was one of my dear friends. In 6 months, she died of cancer. But before she did, she signed over the car to me. So I had a car. And the car that I have today, that is the basis of it, because I followed that pattern. I tried to put a little money and try to change it before it got too old. So Brother Howard always helps me with that to get another one. So that's how I have a car. I never had a home. We lived in a rented home, my wife and my 3 children, until finally a brother said to me one day, I've bought a piece of land and I want to give you a little piece of it. I said, Brother Bill, what am I doing with land? I don't have any money to build a house or anything. What am I doing with a piece of land? But Brother Bill says, I wanted to have this little piece of land. Just a little square, less than quarter of an acre. Not a land where you can plant anything, but you can build a little house there. I never had that in mind. I planned to live in a rented house till I die, but Brother Bill got gave me a little piece of land. So there's that little piece of land. One day my mother, my poor old mother, got $2,000, Jamaican dollars. She says, David, why don't you buy some building blocks? I said, Mama, you're trying to put me in trouble. I don't have any money to build any house. What am I doing with building blocks? She says, no, buy a few and put down. You never can tell what will happen. So she gives me the money, and there's a brother there who had a mold for making blocks. So he came and he, right on the spot, he made some building blocks. So as soon as that was done, the brother who gave me the land, he rallied some of the church brethren, they dug a foundation and they put up walls. And now I have a piece of land and I have 4 walls. And I don't have any money. But to my astonishment, the brother came and said somebody donated $70,000 to put on a roof. Okay? Today, I don't know who donated that money, even until today. Somebody donated $70,000, they got the roof put on. I haven't spent a cent yet. But I have a piece of land, I have 4 walls, and I have a roof. So, little donations came to put in a door, a couple of doors. One day the brother who gave me the land, he came and he says, why don't you move into this, and then you can use the rent that you're paying to help to fix it up. I said, move in, there are no windows. He says, no, we can put tin over the windows. I said, there's no ceiling. He says, yeah, but you can. And you can do that with the rent money. The walls are just block. They are not rendered. They're not even rough cast. It's just a raw block. There's no floor. He says, you can concrete the floor. So he persuaded me. So we moved. And when we moved in at night, it dripped from the roof because there was no ceiling. And when my wife got so sick of dust because when she swept the floor, it was concrete, but they used marl in the concrete. So it's not very strong and it's dusty. So we had that for a while. And the windows were covered with tin. There was no glass. But look, for the first time in my life, I knew that nobody could tell me to leave. I would never have to move again. And it was a strange feeling because I was 40 years old and it was the first time in my life. Now, since that time, I've come a long way. Right? My 3 children were in one room. I had a bunk bed for the boys and I had another bed for the little girl. They were all in one room. So as soon as things started to improve, I tried to get each of them his and her own room. And the strange thing is that as soon as I finished, they grew up and moved away. So I'm left with this house with 4 empty bedrooms, 3 empty bedrooms. But you know, the Lord, it got to the place where I never had to worry anymore about what am I going to eat, what am I going to have next month. The Lord has provided. In fact, I saw something on Facebook not so long ago that irritated me. Okay? You know that some of these ministries, they are setting up an organization. They are setting up an organization where all the tithe is going to come into one central place, and then somebody is going to control it and send it out and pay the ministers. And I saw a conversation on Facebook where somebody was objecting to it, and then another brother said, I prefer when it is done this way, because David Clayton, Howard Williams, Nader Mansour, and Imad Audi, they have done pretty well out of the ministry. Right? This brother, he knows nothing about my history. He knows nothing about how I live. When he said that, I got a little feeling. But then you have to expect things like this. His brother said we have done pretty well out of the ministry, and the implication is that we don't have an organization, so we are taking the money and spending it on ourselves. And we have prospered and done well because we don't have an organization, a central organization where the money is, what do they call it, is monitored or whatever, you know. But the Lord, I'm going to tell you something. And I guess it's going on the video too. So Maybe it's not going to be a secret. But I'll tell you how good God is, right? God has brought me to the place, and Brother Howard to the place where I'm telling you frankly, we don't have to depend on donations from the ministry to live anymore. Everything that goes to the ministry goes 100% to the ministry. Brother Howard and I don't depend on that to live anymore. God has done something that we no longer have to depend on it. And I'm saying it to the camera, and I won't say how, but that is what God has done. God has proven that He's a miracle worker. He's a miracle worker. I can't tell exactly some of the details, but I'll tell you, God amazes me every day. Continually amazes me. What I've proven is that God is faithful. Look at me, a little fellow from the backwoods in Jamaica, a little careless boy who did not know God, who had no right to be a minister. You know, if I'd been accepted at the Adventist University to be an Adventist pastor, I would be somewhere in the hills of Jamaica taking care of 3 little churches. I would never know anywhere outside of Jamaica. Today, in almost every country on the continent, on the planet, there are people who are my friends, my brethren. I can go to any place in the world, and I can know there are people there who accept me as a brother, and who are blessed, and who will confess to being blessed by the messages that God has been sharing through me. I think I see my father's prophecy coming true. Because Daddy was a great preacher, but he never preached anywhere outside of Jamaica. I don't have his eloquence. I don't have his gifts. But look, God has given me the blessing and the privilege of reaching out to every continent on this planet. I've been to Australia 4 times to preach the gospel. I've been to Germany 13 times preaching the gospel. I've been to Romania 11 times preaching the gospel. Likewise, Hungary, Poland, Norway, South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Tanzania, all over, preaching the gospel. I, who never was qualified, it amazes me every day. It amazes me. And it shows me that God not only is amazingly good, but He has a sense of humor. Right? He can smile and say, look what I can do with what everybody considers to be no good. You know, which is why I don't get too discouraged when people have negatives to say. I'm sorry for people. I'm sorry for people when they say I'm trying to destroy Adventism, when they say I'm trying to destroy the law, when they say I'm teaching cheap grace, when they say I'm teaching people to live in sin and I'm teaching holy flesh. I'm sorry for them. Because there are people whom the Lord loves and He wants them to understand the truth. But it's not going to disturb me anymore. You know, since I got into preaching the message of the truth, as God knows the truth, as God has given me the truth, I have lost some of my dear friends. Do you know that? People that were my bona fide brethren turned against me because of the doctrine and will have nothing more to do with me. You know what it has done for me? It has given me a wall. It has given me a wall. On this side of the wall is me and God. And outside of it is everybody else. Let me say there are 2 walls. One is me and God in the first tier. The next tier is me and God and my dear friends who love the truth as I love the truth. And beyond it are those who have chosen to be enemies. But the point is that to hurt me, you have to get past the first wall. You have to get past that wall. So as much as Howard and I are friends, and I hope it is the same with him, if Howard turns against me, I will cry and I will stand with the Lord. Nobody has the power to break me from that place or to turn me away from whatever the Lord shows me that is the truth. I'm glad. Denomination cannot take that. The church cannot take that. The movement cannot take that. My friends cannot take that. I am glad, and I hope it is true for every one of us, brothers and sisters, that our first loyalty is God and His truth. Nothing must come between you and Him in that way. Not your wife, not even your children. So, praise the Lord We praise and thank him for how good he is and how faithful he is. I can testify that he's faithful. So thank you for listening. I just thought I would share that because sometimes it's just good for us to sit down and think about and remember his goodness to us as individuals. Not theology, but theology in a way, helping us to know that he really is a father who really loves and who is faithful. Thank you for your attentiveness. Let's pray.